In June of 1998, a charter pilot flying between two outback towns in South Australia looked down and saw something that shouldn't have been there. A figure, enormous, carved into the desert floor. A man 2.7 kilometres tall holding a throwing stick, visible from 6,000 feet, visible from space, covering an area of roughly 620 acres. The lines were over 35 metres wide and nearly 30 centimetres deep. Somebody had spent weeks out there with heavy equipment on a plateau 60 kilometres from the nearest town, and not one person had seen them do it. That figure is called the Maori Man. Now, nobody knows who made it. Nobody has ever claimed it, and it's not even close to the strangest thing hidden in the Australian outback. If you've never looked past the red dust and the empty roads, you're about to see a very different desert. Subscribe if this kind of thing pulls you in. Most of you watching haven't yet. The outback covers roughly 70% of the Australian continent. That's 5.5 million square kilometres of arid and semi-arid land, larger than Western Europe. Most of it has no sealed roads, no permanent settlements, no infrastructure of any kind. Satellites have mapped it, aircraft have crossed it, and it still keeps producing things no one expected to find. Here's what's actually out there. Number 1. The giant figure nobody made. Start with the Maori Man, because nothing else establishes the scale of what the outback can hide quite like it. The figure was first spotted on June 26, 1998. NASA's Landsat satellite imagery later confirmed it had been created in a window of just 16 days, somewhere between late May and early June of that year. The lines were cut into the desert surface with precision that surveyors estimated would require GPS-guided equipment and heavy machinery operated over several weeks in one of the most remote regions of South Australia, with the nearest town of Maree having a population of 60 people. Not one witness, no tyre tracks leading in or out that pointed to anyone, no footprints at the scale required. Shortly after the discovery, anonymous faxes arrived at local hotels and media outlets, referring to the figure as Stuart's Giant. The faxes quoted measurements in miles, yards, and inches rather than the metric system Australia uses. A plaque buried at the site bore the American flag and the Olympic rings. The most widely cited suspect is an Adelaide-based artist named Bardius Goldberg, who died in 2002 without confirming or denying anything. In 2018, an Australian entrepreneur offered a reward of 5,000 Australian dollars for verified information. No one collected it. The figure has been eroded by weather over the decades. Locals restored it in 2016 using GPS, recutting the lines and adding grooves to trap water and encourage vegetation growth. The Maori Man is now maintained. By who made it, still completely unknown. Number 2. The crater nobody noticed until 1947, 875 metres across, 60 metres from rim to floor, 150 kilometres from the nearest town. Wolf Creek Crater, known to the Aboriginal people of the region as Kandamalal, and in other languages as Janyul and Kantamalal, sits in the Great Sandy Desert of Western Australia. A meteorite, approximately 15 metres in diameter, weighing an estimated 14,000 tonnes, struck here at roughly 17 kilometres per second. The impact released energy equivalent to approximately half a megaton of TNT. It left a crater so deep, so circular, and so well preserved that it reads on satellite imagery like something stamped into the desert from above. Aboriginal people have known it for thousands of years. Their creation stories describe the crater as the place where a giant ancestral snake emerged from the ground. The geological record suggests the impact happened somewhere between 120,000 and 300,000 years ago. The most recent scientific estimates lean toward the lower end of that range. European researchers didn't find it until 1947 during an aerial survey of the Canning Basin. The two geologists who confirmed it on foot described seeing rust balls on the crater slopes, deeply weathered fragments of the original iron meteorite fused to the laterite rock. The meteorite itself had largely vaporized on impact. What remained were the balls. They are still there. Climbing into the crater is not permitted. The terrain is too unstable. Visitors view it from the rim. The desert around it shows no sign anything extraordinary happened there until you're standing at the edge. Number 3. The roads that were already there. Here's something that most people who drive the Outback highways don't realise. Many of those roads were not built by European settlers. They were walked by Aboriginal Australians for tens of thousands of years before a wheel ever crossed this continent. The system is called the song lines, or dreaming tracks in English, a network of routes crossing the full 7.7 million square kilometres of Australia, encoded in song. Each song line is a sequence of verses that describes the route, followed by an ancestral being during the dreaming, the Aboriginal creation period. The lyrics name landmarks, waterholes, ridgelines, rock formations, ceremonial sites. To know the song is to know the route, including where to find water, shelter and food across hundreds of kilometres of desert. Research by Indigenous cultural astronomy researchers at the University of New South Wales found that when certain songline routes are overlaid on modern road maps, there is significant overlap with existing highways. The routes that Aboriginal people established by tens of thousands of years of foot travel, selecting paths by terrain, water access and ease, became drovers' tracks, then dirt roads, then sealed highways. In some cases, the names acknowledge this. The Kamilaroi Highway in New South Wales is one example. The Seven Sisters Songline, one of the most extensive in the network, spans over 3,000 kilometres across the lands of multiple Aboriginal nations: Matu, Anangu Pichanchajara, Yankunytjatjara, Nganyatjara, and encodes a continuous narrative that functions simultaneously as mythology, navigation, law, and astronomy. The same route, the same landmarks. Thousands of years before the road was paved. Number 4. The largest geoglyph controversy. While the Maori Man gets the attention, the Australian Outback contains other large-scale ground markings that predate it by an enormous margin, and their origins are considerably better understood. Stone arrangements, carved channels, and circular enclosures distributed across thousands of square kilometres of the interior have been documented through aerial surveys and drone mapping in recent years. Sites associated with Anangu, Pichanchajara, and Yankunytjatjara communities include formations connected to songlines and ceremonial purposes that the communities themselves identify and maintain. Carbon dating of organic material near some of these sites has returned results ranging from several hundred to several thousand years old. The dating of the structures themselves is technically complex and still being refined. What the aerial documentation has confirmed is scale. Patterns of cultural modification across the outback interior that are not visible at ground level become coherent from above, suggesting a level of deliberate spatial organisation across this landscape that existing historical accounts substantially underrepresent. Number 5. The 1,000 species nobody expected. Underground, directly beneath the red surface of the outback, researchers have found something that stopped the scientific team when they first encountered it. A team from the University of Adelaide, the South Australian Museum, and the Western Australian Museum began sampling small underground cavities beneath the desert, thin layers of rock and soil just below the surface in the gaps between groundwater and open air. What they found were invertebrates, thousands of them, species adapted to complete darkness, low nutrients, and no surface connection. The initial discovery was of over 1,000 new species, with researchers estimating a further 3,500 likely waiting in unsurveyed areas. When the lead researcher described the reaction to the first findings, he said simply, "When the discovery was first made, we didn't really believe it. These are stygofauna, the same class of underground aquatic life found in the Nullabore's cave systems, but in this case distributed beneath the desert surface across a much larger geographic area. Species with reduced or absent eyes, elongated limbs, adapted to conditions that on paper shouldn't support life. The outback's surface is arid. The substrate beneath it is not." Number 6. The largest dinosaur found by a cattle farmer. In 2006, Robin and Stuart Mackenzie were mustering cattle near Eromanga in southwest Queensland when they noticed bone fragments in the soil. The fossils they had stumbled onto were eventually excavated and identified over subsequent years. What they found was Cooper, formerly Australotitan cooperensis, a titanosaur sauropod and the largest dinosaur ever found in Australia. Cooper is among the 15 largest dinosaurs ever found anywhere on Earth. The species was related to titanosaurs previously known only from South America, which has reframed scientific understanding of how and when certain dinosaur lineages dispersed across the ancient supercontinent Gondwana before Australia separated. The property near Eromanga sits on what was, 100 million years ago, a lush river floodplain in a warm, wet interior. Today it is outback Queensland, flat, dry, temperatures exceeding 40 degrees Celsius in summer. The same bones that were buried when that ancient river existed are now eroding out of the same ground that cattle walk across. Dozens of excavation sites on the Mackenzie property remain unexcavated. Cooper was the first discovery. The team working there has said clearly that it is unlikely to be the last. Number 7. The empty highway that isn't empty. The Stuart Highway runs 2,700 kilometres from Port Augusta in South Australia to Darwin in the Northern Territory. It crosses the full north-south span of the continent's interior. For much of its length, there is nothing visible in any direction. The reports from this stretch are consistent enough to document without editorialising lights in the sky that don't match any known flight path. Objects moving at angles and speeds inconsistent with conventional aircraft. Multiple independent reports from truckers, road workers and travellers over decades, none coordinated, none retracted. The Australian outback is not monitored airspace in the way populated regions are. The interior has sparse radar coverage. What passes through it at altitude or at low altitude over the desert at night is largely unobserved by any tracking system. The reports from the Stuart Highway and the surrounding region are not evidence of any particular explanation. They are evidence of consistent observation over a remote corridor that nobody is watching with instruments precise enough to determine what's there, which may, in the end, be the most accurate summary of the outback itself. A landscape so large, so empty by conventional standards that what happens inside it remains, in significant part, unverified. 7 things the outback is hiding. A geoglyph no one claims. A crater the size of a small town that sat unrecognized for millennia. Road networks encoded in song, still echoing in the highways built over them. Ground markings spanning thousands of square kilometres. 1,000 species living in the dark beneath the desert. The largest dinosaur ever found in Australia, discovered by accident by cattle farmers, and a highway corridor with a decades-long record of unexplained aerial observations. The outback is not empty. It never was. Which of these surprised you most? I'm in the comments. Subscribe if you want to keep going. There's more ground to cover.